Kia ora tātou, ka mi nui ki koutou kia ora, welcome to this meeting of the Dunedin City Council for Tuesday, the 29th of March. Welcome to my council colleagues and to staff and to those who are joining us remotely today or sometime in the future. There is no public forum. Item 2, apologies. We have an apology from Councillor Hall, and I'll move that apology be accepted. Seconded, Councillor Walker. Thank you. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. Item 3, confirmation of the agenda. I'll move that Council confirm the agenda without additional alteration. Seconded, Councillor Gary. Thank you. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed. Item 4, are there any amendments to be made to the interests register? Councillor Lawfiso.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. I have updated my register, or it has been updated to reflect that I have a family member who's now an employee, and it's in. I think it's in the. It's been updated.
That's fine. Thank you. If there's nothing further, I'll move that we amend, if necessary, the elected members' interest register as attached, confirm the proposed management plan and note the ELT interest register. Seconded, Councillor Gary. Thank you. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed. Item 5, confirmation of the minutes. I'll move that Council confirm the public part of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 22nd of February. Seconded, Councillor Gary. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed. Item 6, minutes of community boards. Mosgiel Tairi Community Board, Councillor Houlihan.
You're on
mute.
Hear you. You're on mute.
You're on mute, Councillor.
Sorry. Yes, I'd like to ask us to note the minutes of the Mosgiel Community Board held on the 10th of November. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Wiley. Thank you. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. Item 7, the Otago Peninsula Community Board, Councillor Wiley.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like the council to note the minutes of the Otago Peninsula Community Board meeting held on the 11th of November 2021.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Lord. Thank you. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. Strathtyre Community Board, Councillor Lord.
Yes, I'd like the council to note the minutes of the Strathtyre Community Board held on the 11th of November 2021. Thank you.
Seconded, Councillor Elder. Thank you. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. 9, West Harbour Community Board, Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I'll move that the council notes the minutes of the West Harbour Community Board meeting held on 17th November 2021.
Seconder for that, Councillor Elder. Thank you. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed. Item 10, the Saddle Hill Community Board, Councillor Raddick.
Yes, I move that the council notes the minutes of the Saddle Hill Community Board meeting held on 18 November 2021.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Wiley. Thank you. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. Thank you. Item 11, Waikawaiti Coast Community Board, Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Bishop. I move that the council notes the minutes of the Waikawaiti Coast Community Board meeting held on 24th of November 2021. Thank you.
It's been seconded by Councillor Raddick. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed. Item 12, actions from resolutions of council meetings. Anything you wish to add by introduction? Ms. Graham?
No, I'm happy to take questions, Your Worship.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Raddick.
On page 29 of the actions from resolution actions for resolutions of council meetings, and 28 and 29. It talks about the Three Waters reform, and it talks about the notice of motion, and that affirms the government does not currently support the formation. Given that LGNZ must support Three Waters reforms as per their heads of agreement with the government, what other choices does council have to directly advocate to government about our position?
Oh, firstly, that's not correct. The only thing that is expressly mentioned in the heads of agreement is that LGNZ wouldn't actively oppose mandation, as opposed to the system design elements. But do you have anything in response, Ms. Graham?
That doesn't seem to relate to the notice of motion that I can see. I'm not sure how I can answer that.
And I'd also look to 4.2 of the heads of agreement. It says,
Councillor, do you have questions about the council forward work program at this point?
Action items, Your Worship. I think.
Sorry, the action items.
Yes. Well, are there any? What other choices? The question remains: what other choices do we have to directly advocate to government?
That's not particularly a question of the action list, really.
And it's not something that I can answer in response to that action, Your Worship.
All right, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Elder. You're on mute. Still on mute.
Sorry. What were our actions from those motions? Were we meant to send a letter to government expressing our view? And so it's got due date and status, and nothing has been done. That was all I was querying.
Yeah, and as far as I know, no letter was sent because no letter was asked for.
Oh, I see.
So the resolution itself was the affirmation of the council's position.
Okay. I mean, that's what I was unclear about, because, we usually have actions and status, and I was unclear what the action was or the status. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor O'Malley.
And so I'm just giving a final clarification question. Therefore, it has been interpreted that as simply a status position, and there will be no action from the council on anything beyond that statement.
As a result of that particular statement, that's correct.
Thank you.
No further questions. I'll move that council note the open and completed actions from resolutions of council meetings as attached. Seconded, Councillor Gary. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. Item 13, the forward work program from the 10-year plan 21 to 31, incorporating the 22-23 annual plan. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Worship. I just have a question on page 34, and it's just around the performing arts venue, where it says that staff are working on establishing a performing arts roundtable group meeting. And I just want to understand the process for that. And this might be a detail that you might be able to get back on. Is it going out to just everyone that might consider themselves to be part of performing arts? You remember we had that discussion about what is performing arts. So I just want to know if that's open to everybody to join, or whether there's shoulder tapping, or how that's working.
Councillor, that I think was covered in the next step of that performing arts venue report, but it's not a level of detail I can answer, but I'm happy to provide you with an update following the meeting.
Yeah, and it's a valid question, and thankfully we have a community and culture committee meeting not that far away, where the relevant staff will likely be there with the command of that detail.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Councillor Gary.
Oh, thank you, Worship. Two questions. The first is around the curbside provision of new services. What impact would the suggestion at a government level, and I believe the government's gone out to consult on the possibility of a national curbside, or certainly there's been a suggestion of a national curbside system. What impact, if that came to pass, would that have on on where we're up to right now? And I guess I'm directing this at the Chief Executive.
So we were aware of the likely direction of government when we were going through the procurement process. And so we have been in the market on that basis, and the contract will be set up in such a way as we can meet any changes that the government may implement.
Excellent. And my second question is on page 34, which is around the changing places bathroom and the difficulty of getting a particular components from Scandinavia. Do we have any understanding or update since the report was written about the delay or the time frame that we might get that in?
No.
Is that known? Okay, thank you.
Just on that question, my recollection of the paper that came to council was speaking to government's consultation document on the future of recycling is that what we are planning on doing is entirely consistent with what they're seeking feedback on. But just it's a related question with regards to the Waste Futures program, Ms. Graham, and I'm sure I'm not the only one here who not infrequently gets approached by people in the community or various groups who are interested in composting or waste diversion or waste minimization or whatever. And it's great that there was input from some groups in terms of putting together the procurement for the Waste Futures work, but raising the question as to whether there will be further opportunities for the community to be involved in helping us achieve our waste minimization goals.
So I've checked with Mr. Drew, and he's advised that as part of the discussions with the contractors, ongoing community involvement and community-based options are part of the discussions that are being had. And so that will be open. We don't know quite what that will look like yet, but there's a commitment that will continue and the community will have an opportunity to be involved.
It's very reassuring. Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. My question is a follow-up question to Councillor Gary's inquiry around the changing places bathroom. And the suggestion there is that an attractive facility will still be progressed in year one. So the question is that an attractive facility the place that will ultimately become the changing places bathroom and be retrofitted once the stuff arrives, or is it just another bathroom?
We will progress another toilet from the list, and rather than start the changing places one and not be able to complete it.
Cool, thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Oh, I'm unmuted. That's helpful. My question really in the forward work program is there's no mention of something we voted on, which is the tunnels trail from Dunedin to Mosgiel, and I was just wondering where that was sitting.
So I've circulated this morning to councillors a document that wasn't ready in time for this agenda, which covers no, it's fine. It just wasn't ready, and I apologise for that. It summarises the actions from the January draft annual plan meeting. That will be tabled formally at the council meeting in April, but that talks to the progress for the tunnels trail, and that there'll be a report on that at the May meeting.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you for that.
Councillor Walker, is it a legacy hand or a separate question? Thank you. No further questions. I'll move that council notes the forward work program from the 10-year plan 21 to 31. Seconded Councillor Walker. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed. Item 14, support for grant recipients impacted by COVID-19. Mr. Pickford, welcome. And Mrs. Lanini, welcome.
Thank you.
Anything either of you wish to add by way of introduction?
Just very briefly, Your Worship, just for clarity, any decisions on grant extensions after that date of the 1st of October, which is what we've set the time frame for, will be covered off in the interregnum arrangements report, which comes to council later in the year. So just make that clear.
Thank you. Ms. Graham, can you give a short version of what the interregnum arrangements paper is for those who haven't had it presented to them before?
Bear with while I zoom myself back in. So councillors, in the final meeting of the triennium, in advance of the date of the council election, we need to have in place arrangements that cover what we call the interregnum period, where we have from the date of the election till the date that the new council is sworn in, and the chief executive or other folk are given various delegations that allow the business of council to continue in the absence of having a sworn in council.
Thanks. Councillor Gary.
Happy to move at the appropriate time, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Happy to second.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Mr. Pickford and Ms. Lanini, I see in the executive summary in point 3, it says this is made in response in the best interest of local events and arts sector. But I'm just thinking, especially in the local and the not-for-profit space, and I think of organisations like Volunteer South, which I chair, that there are many, many organisations struggling with lack of funding due to COVID and not being able to do their fundraising, run the dinners or any other events to raise funds. And I guess if there is any surplus of funds, would they be able to transfer across into that sector as well? Or is there any other opportunity? And I have a feeling I missed the chance of being able to do this when we drafted the annual plan for extension of funding in the budget.
For the community grants, Councillor, I'm pretty sure, it's been a while since I've been involved, that they are just granted to those organisations for their operational activities in any given year and aren't tied to specific projects, and so don't have the same issues as the events sector might.
Correct, but there is when you look at nearly all the not-for-profits around town, they are struggling with funding, especially around Class 4 gambling funds are down dramatically. We've got no one's been able to host, or very few have hosted fundraising events to assist their own coffers, but yet the operations have had to keep going and the overheads are still there.
So is it a question about
how we fund funds?
Is it a question of what additional support might there be over?
Correct.
Okay, sorry, my apologies. Mr. Pickford or Mrs. Lanini?
That's not covered in this report, as the report specifically is looking at events or activities that have been postponed or postponed. If you are asking if there is a need, there is a need across the community for funding. That is correct, additional funding.
But there's certainly no budget for it in the current financial year, but those are all things that we can consider in the round.
But not covered by this report and certainly not budgeted.
Yeah.
That's fine. Thank you. I just wanted to highlight it though, and I guess we can address it at annual plan time.
Councillor Elder.
Hi. On considering what Andrew has said, and indeed very few have been able to fundraise, and also in view of a growing reluctance in the community of taking funds from either gambling, the outcomes of gambling, or alcohol, I believe, and thinking about the discussion we had with local government New Zealand about funding and the shortfall of funding in the community, is it time we put a subsequent motion to government to say, can the government consider these factors and kind of increase their funding to the sector given COVID-19 and all the other factors? Council can
resolve to advocate to any party on any issue that it feels moved to, but as has been pointed out by staff, this paper that we're considering is for a very specific issue where we're able to grant extensions to people who have funding that ordinarily they would be expected to spend within 12 months, but have had to make different arrangements because of the current public health situation. So while I have some sympathy for the question, I don't think it's a question of this report, and it's something best considered at subsequent meetings.
Yes, so I would like to put that forward for a subsequent meeting, because in fact,
that's fine. We can deal with it at that subsequent meeting.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Further questions? No, it's been moved by Councillor Gary and seconded by Councillor Elder. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor?
I would, thank you, Your Worship. Just to be very specific, this motion deals with a specific issue we have at Grant Subcommittee, because what we're facing are a number of organisations, as you'll appreciate, who've had to change their dates for events a number of times because of COVID. And it's in the absence of a motion like this is very similar to what we've had before, by the way. It has limited our ability. We haven't been able to go beyond that 12 months. And of course, you'll appreciate there's been uncertainty for some time, and people have reorganised their date, and then it's had to be postponed again, and sometimes outside of that 12-month period. We have a very robust system of dealing with this, which has got built-in accountability, and it also allows us, with the passing of this motion, to be flexible and respond to our organisations in our community across the board on this matter. And I would like to acknowledge staff and the considerable work that they have done around this with community groups. And also I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues on the Grants Subcommittee for their work. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'll be very brief. Speak as a member of the Grant Subcommittee. And COVID-19 obviously has put a lot of organisations into a state of flux and under great stress, actually. And obviously the current policy it isn't that flexible. So I think by doing this, we just create that flexibility. It's worked well. And as Councillor Gary says, be under no illusions that when requests do come back to us, there are very robust processes in place, and any decisions aren't just taken on a willy-nilly basis. They are done with often robust discussion and conversation. So fully support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Your right of reply, Councillor.
No need.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed. Item 15, the council submission on the draft drinking water quality assurance rules, standards, aesthetic values, and drinking water network environmental performance measures. And if that title isn't an advertisement for the semicolon, I don't know what is. Welcome, Mr. Drew and Mr. Campbell. Welcome. Anything from either of you to begin?
Nothing further to add, just happy to take questions.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Do you have any concerns about chemicals being added to the water in this? It mentions in the review. Do we have any concerns about that?
No. It's common practice to put chemicals in safe amounts into drinking water supplies.
But I believe they're going to add more chemicals to the drinking water. Is that correct?
Not my understanding, no.
They were on RNZ this morning saying that they will be adding more because apparently people have got fatter. People have gone from 60k to 70k or something, and they're saying that they'll have to add a bit more chemicals or something.
No, we're not aware of that, sorry, Councillor.
Oh. It was on the interview this morning. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Okay, so you've got no concerns. Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Worship. I have a couple of questions. My first one is on page 51, where it talks about addressing, sorry, just find the page. It's under the financial strategy, annual plan, etc. And it says that implementations of work programs to meet the new rules, standards and values is likely to require additional financial and human resources. These work programs and resource requirements will be addressed through the next annual plan process. And I'm wondering, do we have a backup plan for if those dates don't change? Because it currently says that everything's going to come into force on the 1st of July 2022. And I'm wondering if we have money in the budget basically for if that stuff does come into play on the 1st of July 2022.
Well, we haven't approved a budget for the 22-23 year. So the
okay, so my question will be then, when would we possibly know, because the budget's going out to consultation, and when will we possibly know so that we can be flexible around the budget? Or
so if I might, Your Worship, if councillors recall in the January meeting, my covering report flagged that there would be a paper coming on Three Waters and implementation resources that wouldn't necessarily have an impact on rates. And so it's not part of the annual plan budgets at this stage. And that paper is coming in April, or hopefully April, potentially May, for councils to consider. And then that may or may not lead to changes in the annual plan. But that paper deals with resource requirements and some ways that might be delivered.
thank you. My second question is just around putting a different lens on it. And when Three Waters reform happens, I guess we've looked at it as someone that's or as an entity that's delivering the water, but have we also looked at it as an entity that's having the water delivered to them? So I wonder if we're protecting ourselves both ways, because we are not quite poacher and game catcher, is that the right one, in this, but I just wonder where that lens has been put over it. And this was a late thought when I was rereading it.
No, I guess we haven't. It's more the lens we've taken is how will these affect DCC as a water supplier, not how it will affect the customer. What I do know is the National Transition Unit for Three Waters reform, service delivery reform, are thinking about those things. But this submission is more the impact for DCC as a water supplier.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Worship. This question really is more for those who are interested in where we are in Three Waters reform. So is it correct in saying that after the formation of Te Mata ROI and the establishment of the regulator, Te Mata ROI is now going through establishing what will effectively turn into the new drinking water standards, and this is effectively part of what is establishing that work stream?
That's correct.
Thanks. And in the future, if the entity is formed and it goes to Christchurch, what do you think the likelihood of a council like Dunedin being asked about any future standards changes will be, or do you think that will end up heading to the regulator and not to the councils? You probably don't have an opinion on that.
Well, it's difficult to say, Councillor, because the detail will be the devil will be in the detail of how the entities are formed, and we just don't know enough at this stage.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
No, thank you, Your Worship. I wonder if you could, it's referring to item 29 on page 58 around the smaller private water suppliers that were previously unregulated. What would be the proportion of those smaller private water suppliers within our city boundaries? Would you have that percentage or even a ballpark at hand?
No, we don't have a ballpark to hand, I'm afraid.
Okay. All right, thank you.
We appear to have, excuse me, exhausted questions. I spoke too soon. Councillor Elder.
My question is related to something that we had discussed a couple of years ago, and that is that there are a lot of pipes on private properties in Dunedin that are very old And in terms of water infrastructure, a lot may need some upgrading. And I was just wondering,
Councillor, this is a paper on a submission on drinking water standards. Yeah, the private stormwater issue is a very real one, but I'm struggling to see.
Oh, right. Sorry, I put it in the wrong place. Sorry.
All good.
But I have a concern about that. I'll talk to you about that separately, Simon.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I just want to ask a question, Simon. Sorry, is there any future views around, at the moment, our city has a very defined water boundary, delivery of service. And for people that want to join from outside that boundary, we pretty much tell them no, unless there's very exceptional circumstances. Do you know if there will be any expressed changes under Tamara ROI in that area? Will people have more chance of being able to join up to service if they don't get it? And I think even, I mean, I'm not worried about it myself, but I live here at Berwick. I'm outside the area, can't join, but there's water 100 metres away, sort of thing. And I'm wondering if there will be any future for those types of people.
Thanks, Councillor. Now, my understanding is that Tamata Arawai won't drive those kind of decisions. It'll be for councils, and if the service delivery reform continues, it'll then be the new entities that will drive those decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vanders.
What consultation has there been with the small and private supplies that are potentially going to be very significantly impacted by these new rules, standards and values?
So my understanding, Councillor, is that Tamata Arawai have had extensive engagement with those smaller water suppliers. So I know that Bill Bayfield visited Central Otago District Council and did a tour with their General Manager of Infrastructure of some of the smaller and private drinking water schemes to gain an appreciation of the scale of the problem and the issues that we're facing. So I know that Tamata Arawai have been doing that, but here at DCC, we haven't done that. We've focused this submission on our drinking water supplies.
Why have we not consulted with the hundreds of small private drinking water supplies that we actually have within our own area that this submission has dramatic effects for?
Predominantly resourcing, Councillor, it's a very busy time for the Three Waters team, and we're trying to focus our resource on where it has the most benefit to the majority of our community. And we simply haven't had time to go and do engagement with some of our smaller private suppliers.
Have you had feedback from any of the small and private suppliers?
Yeah, we're aware of general feedback, but no specific targeted feedback.
Is that general feedback of significant concern that they're going to be faced with new rules, standards and values that may be very expensive?
Yes, that would be fair.
Why is that not represented in this paper, which has a lot of detail in?
Yeah, I guess as I said before, Councillor, we focused our resource on considering the majority of the community, and we didn't take that lens. We did offer councillors the opportunity to join us and help write the submission, and that didn't come up in that previous workshop.
Thank you.
There are no further questions. Would someone like to move? Councillor O'Malley, thank you. And is there a seconder for this? Councillor Staines. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Worship. First want to thank staff for their level of work they put into this, and our new experimentation of having a look at this document before we get to a meeting, so we're not having a double meeting. I think it worked very well, and given it was such a technical document, there wasn't a huge amount to discuss. But I do want to comment on a couple of things that come up. This is quite, people talk about Three Waters reform and opposition and support of it. Three Waters reform is already underway, and the first phase of it is actually more or less over. So the first part of it was the formation of the water entity regulator and the establishment of new water standards. So the regulator is Te Mata Arawai. Its sole purpose is to be the regulator. So people are obviously still confusing it with as the provider that's coming in the future. Currently, the councils are the providers. Small water suppliers at the moment are independent, but will, as Te Mata Arawai moves through its work stream, effectively have to come under, they'll either have to be able to demonstrate their ability to perform independently or will have to be subsumed into the suppliers. I do know of a couple of small suppliers in the area, and I've talked to one, once we talked about what was in their system, they're already compliant even under the new regulations. So not all suppliers will be uncompliant. I really am though saying that this might be one of the, it may not be too long before we're no longer involved in these discussions, because I think these discussions will be with suppliers. And if we're not the supplier, then we won't be involved in those discussions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Worship. I want to acknowledge staff taking on board and developing item 30 and 31, which is around the review of the current New Zealand plumbing standards. And I realised that that's not up to us and not up to Te Mata Arawai, but it is really important. It was something we became aware of during our situation up in Wakawaiti. And there are some considerable issues there that need to be reviewed. So thank you for that. And 31, which is again, not within the scope of what we do, but it's around how this might be addressed. And that's the domestic self-suppliers, which of course is different to the private water suppliers. And basically domestic self-suppliers are out in the cold to a larger degree and don't necessarily have access to safe, healthy drinking water, something that we all take for granted when we turn the tap on. And there are people within our city boundaries who have to cart their water, be it filling up at a public standpipe on the back of a trailer or carting bottles of water. And until you've done that, you don't realise how critical it is to have access to safe, reliable drinking water. So thank you to the staff for including those two items, even though they're not part of our responsibility, but raising it in this submission.
Thank you, Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Worship. I asked the question around timing just and our budgets because it had been raised in the report, and both in the feedback it had been asked for a stage approach to implementation. So I just kind of wanted to have that out there just in case we did have to rush and change the budget in the end. And the other question I asked was around us being whether we take it from the customer's point of view as well as the suppliers, but I actually realised I came to that light bulb moment a little bit late, but I do hope that we'll have time in the future as customers to say about what we want our water to be like. Thank you.
Thank you. And just picking up on that point around staff suggestion of the staged timing of the implementation of this, I would hope that that would get some traction. It seems like a fairly pragmatic suggestion to navigating a lot of work in a very short period of time. And I think it speaks to the recurring problem that we have with central government processes, and that they appear often to develop timelines in a vacuum and have very little regard to the statutory timeframes and budget setting processes that local government are bound by, and we don't have the flexibility necessarily to be able to respond in the timeframes as they are set out. And this is a significant example of that, and it's certainly something that we need to continue to work with government on is trying to align implementation timeframes. And this isn't the first time, and it won't be the last time that this issue comes up. But we need to better align those timelines to give us a reasonable chance of being able to implement them. Councillor O'Malley, your right of reply.
Thank you, Worship. Just want to pick up on Councillor Gary's commentary around the building standards and her request to have that put into our submission, which I think is a good one. And it comes to the scope of Te Mata Arawai. I am of the opinion that its scope is relatively narrow, and it does respond to the Havelock North situation from its primary objective, and therefore it's focused heavily on reticulated drinking water systems. However, safe drinking water has to be considered to be in a wider remit than that. So therefore, I'm hoping that as it moves forward, Te Mata Arawai is given actually more authoritative power in terms of all drinking water and an ability to have an influence on things like the building standards and other such things. It is not the government's intention, though, to make sure or assist people in getting safe drinking water. It's the government's intention to regulate that when providers are providing, the water is safe. And that's why they have quite specifically drawn the line between a provider and an individual, because they are not intending to make it safe for you if you live out in the middle of nowhere and get your water. They're intending that if you get your water from the end of a tap, it is safely delivered to you. And therefore, again, we need to ask the government, what is its intention around water? Is it really a response to Havelock North and just an extension of that? Or is it actually truly addressing the actual ability to get safe drinking water everywhere, no matter who you are? And just to his worships, and I think Councillor Barker's kind of commentary as well, there's always a timing issue. And I think part of the feedback we've given was good in terms of alignment to our own funding cycles and planning cycles. And I'm hoping that's taken into account by the government. But essentially, this is a fairly non-controversial submission. It's really mostly about numbers and standards and other such things, but it sits into the higher order question of the whole, putting it all together as we come forward in the next year to two years. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against?
Councillor Baker, that recorded, please.
Yeah, that is fine. That is agreed. Item 16, earthquake-prone buildings, special consultative procedure identifying key vehicle and pedestrian routes in Strathtyre. Ms. Austin and Mr. Henderson, welcome.
Kia ora tātou.
Anything you wish to offer by introduction?
No, Your Worship. We're just happy to take it as read.
Thank you. It always makes me nervous when there are no submissions on something, insofar as it's hard to know how far-reaching our call for submissions is, and we're not entirely in control of that. But I'm assuming there was some proactive discussions with people in the Strathtyre to make them aware of this process.
Yes, the process is referred to in paragraph 6 in terms of methods. Was there anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, that's yeah. We met with the community meeting in February as well.
Great, it's reassuring. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Worship. My question was just following up on the community board meeting, and it says that a staff member went, but it doesn't say if there was any feedback. I'm unaware if that's in the minutes or whether there was feedback to say, actually, we do agree with this, and that's why there's probably no submissions.
So I attended the community meeting, and we provided a presentation on the changes being proposed, and there was no issues or no concerns from the community board at that time.
Thank you.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Just been answered, thank you.
Marginally more questions than there were submissions. Would someone like to move the recommendations? Councillor Benson-Pope. Is there a second? Councillor Lord? Would you like to speak to it, Councillor?
Briefly, I think this is a good example from evidence by the concerns that people have expressed, ironically, about a good consultative process, probably made easier by such a discrete target area, but this work needed to be done, and it would appear that our staff have allayed people's concerns, explained the reasons for the discussion paper and the rules, and we have what we have before us. Well done.
Thank you. Further speakers? The right of reply would appear to be redundant. I will put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed. Item 17, the financial result. Mr. Logie, welcome.
Thank you.
Anything?
To take the report as read, Your Worship.
Thank you. Thank you for saving me the effort of asking that question. Are there questions, councillors? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Logie, for the report. I just have a question around the aquatic centre in Mosgiel, and sorry, I'm shuffling through my papers here, trying to see where I marked it. But I know one tranche of the payment has been made, and off the top of my head, maybe 3.2 million, and it suggests that a balance has to be paid. I'm just curious as to know what that amount is and when that is to be paid.
My understanding is the total funding is in the order of $4 million. So yes, we received 3.2 in February, and the balance of that will be coming. It's driven by some of the funders have certain criteria that need to be met before they'll release their external funding to the trust. So it'll be driven by those criteria, but I don't know the specifics.
Cool, thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, Gavin, my question, I'm not sure if it'll be you or the chief that answered it, but sort of same question I asked at the finance meeting on the previous month's spending is, are there any concerns around the underspend capex on certain departments? We're well ahead with Three Waters. In fact, they're almost up at their whole year budget, but just some of the other areas we are a bit behind, and there might be reasons for that, but are there any concerns that certain departments just are falling behind?
Do you want to go again, Mr. Logie?
I don't have any specific comments. I mean, obviously there's challenges in the building sector, but certainly those projects are progressing. They may be just progressing slower. The Peninsula project in transport was one that the next stage has now just been tendered. So that work will start as a result of that tender process.
Ceiling program, I think the ceiling program is now well underway, and people will have noticed that around the city. And so transport, I think in March are spending more than they have in previous months. So I don't have any concerns across the board. I think the capital result is a really, really solid one, especially when you look at some of the challenges that other councils who neighbour us are facing.
What about in the park space? We're well under there. What is that a result of? Is there something we've committed to that's a major item, or
is it Moana?
Some of it does relate to the Mosgiel pool. Just again, it's just the timing of that work is progressing, and then there is some underspend in Moana while we sort of finalise how we're going to renew the hydro slide, etc.
Okay, thank you.
Slabaka.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question of clarification, and maybe this is for Mr. Drew. On page 109, it talks about that transportation expenditure was unfavourable, and it's due to greater state highway street lighting maintenance. And I guess that I'd always understood that state highways were the responsibility of Waka Kotahi. So I just wondered, do we actually pay for the lighting on those streets?
No, Councillor, we do the work on behalf of Waka Kotahi and then are reimbursed.
So this is maybe about timing then, is it?
Yeah, that's right. So there'll be an expenditure line, and then comes with that a grants line.
Oh, good to clarify. Thank you. My next question you might be able to help with as well on page 113. It talks about the operating expenditure being unfavourable, 1.9 million, primarily due to unbudgeted expenditure on stimulus funded project work. I'm just concerned that have we got enough money from the government to cover the stimulus projects that we're doing, or are we, I guess, underwriting / subsidising those?
So I can answer that one, Mr. Drew. So what happens is that we have the money received for the stimulus funding, and then obviously as we spend it, we drop it into the income line. So the income is reflected. So there's an increased income line offsetting that expenditure.
Okay, yeah, I just heard that it was unfavourable due to, but I guess that's an accounting thing, isn't it? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, the other question I had, Mr. Logie, was the current war in Ukraine and the effects that's having on equity markets and that. Where is the latest data on the Waipori Fund looking? Not just what's to the end of February in these accounts, but what's happening right at the moment.
Again, we haven't closed off March yet, Councillor. So once we close off March, and we'll give a quarterly update on the Waipori Fund to Council at the next appropriate meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Sorry, Councillor Lord's just inspired me to ask a question of Mr. Logie. Mr. Logie, isn't it the case, of course, that the Waipori Fund's whole modus operandi, particularly in the equities space, is long-term investment? So an expectation, of course, that the short-term falls will obviously will work themselves out of the system.
That's correct, Councillor.
No further questions. Would someone like to move the recommendations? Councillor Lord, thank you. Is there a second? Councillor Walker. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Lord?
Oh, well, just briefly, look, this is just the month's accounts. They're very similar to budget. We've caught up where we had a deficit to a certain degree, and I'm pretty happy with how these have been budgeted. In fact, it's almost scary how accurately our budget is reflecting, our actuals are reflecting our budget. So, yeah, no, it's business as usual.
Thank you. Further speakers? Being none, I will put it. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed. Thank you. Item 18. Election 2022 order of candidate names for voting documents. We welcome Ms. Sullivan and Ms. Weekaida.
Kia ora. Good morning, Your Worship.
Anything you wish to expand upon from the paper?
No, just happy to answer questions.
That is fine. Are there questions? All the way down to the bottom of the alphabet. Councillor Wiley.
Actually, Your Worship, that is exactly why I'll be happy to move this with the recommendation. I did see an election where being an A was an advantage. So as a W, I definitely will be moving this recommendation.
And as a W, can I second it, please?
Yeah, that is fine. Thank you. It's the same jokes every 3 years. But just on that though, I wonder at a higher level in any of the discussions you're involved in, Ms. Sullivan, is the repeated requirement for us to have this debate every 3 years as opposed to things existing in perpetuity as our decisions around the voting method do, for example? Is that something that, is it an active conversation or not?
It is an active conversation. There are a number of matters around elections and the administration of them that are, but it just depends on the ability of the government to get that through, or their wish list to get that through. But it is under discussion, but it's a matter of timing.
And hardly a priority on the order paper, I would imagine anyhow. Are there questions? No, it's been moved and seconded. Already spoken to it to some degree. Councillor Wiley, do you have anything further to add at this point?
No, I would actually just like to comment that it is in a fair and assessed way for everybody to go through the voting process. I do have to acknowledge that my daughter's first time to vote, the voting papers came in last election, and the first name on the list for her to vote for was Wiley for council. So that was a great, just one, see my name at the top of a list for a change, and secondly, to be have her to be able to just go one at the top of that list. So, but it is great to see how random that list does come out. And it is, and some people believe it's, random as in we start with the W's first and work your way through. It is totally random, and how every ballot paper is so different from the next. So thank you for this motion, and thank you, Councillor Walker, for seconding it.
Thank you. If only alphabetical ordering by first name were an option. Councillor Walker.
Thank you for moving it, Councillor Wiley. Very briefly, we base our decisions on research. The research shows that this is far more equitable, and I certainly have no desire to change my surname to Aardvark. So more than happy for this to pass through. Thank you. Bye.
Dare I ask if you have anything by way of your right of reply, Councillor Wiley? No. I'll put the motion on. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed. Item 19, proposed event road closures for April 2022. Welcome, Ms. Benson. Anything you wish to, sorry, Mr. Drew and Ms. Benson, anything you wish to add? This is a long way of saying no.
It's still on mute.
No, it's fine. Yeah, no, it's entirely fine as an answer. Councillor Benson Pope.
Happy to move.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Elder.
Happy to second.
Thank you. It would appear there are none. It's been moved and seconded. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Benson Pope? Are there further speakers? Being none, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed. It's 11 o'clock. Subsequent items would take longer than half an hour, one would assume. So I'll move that we adjourn the meeting until 11:15. Seconded, Councillor Walker. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. Thank you. Kia ora koutou, welcome back. Item 20, notice of motion, revocation of the Communities for Local Democracy decision, which is in my name. I will move it, and Councillor Gary is seconding it. And in speaking to it today, I am asking us to withdraw from this local government splinter group as a tangible commitment that can set us on a path to repairing our relationship with mana whenua. Because while it is characterised as a partnership in terms of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, we're better to think of it as a relationship, which is something that requires ongoing work and commitment. And we have all been less than our best selves in our own personal relationships at some point, and we know that we can damage them far more readily than we can rebuild them. Passing this resolution today won't fix it, but it gives us the opportunity to be back in the room and back at the table and work towards fixing it. And this isn't about me, and it isn't about this council. It isn't about our individual crusades and campaigns. It is about what is in the best interests of the city. And what is in the enduring best interests of the city is a relationship, a strong and active relationship between the council and mana whenua, a relationship that transcends who may be sitting in any of our chairs at any given point, a relationship that this council has been lucky to inherit largely in good heart, thanks to the work put in by Mayor Cull in working on it in his time in office. I'm asking us to reconsider because the response from mana whenua has come as a surprise to some of us. So it is entirely appropriate to offer council the opportunity to reconsider. There is absolutely no shame in self-reflection, in weighing up the collateral damage of taking a particular position and then choosing to chart a different course. As individuals and as an organisation, we're on a journey with regard to our commitment to the Treaty of Waitangi and what it means to be a public institution within a bicultural nation. People are understandably at different stages on that journey, but if we're committed to it, we need to accept that there will be times when all of us get things wrong. And instead of doubling down in those situations, we can take the opportunity from them to learn and to grow, which is to say we can show some humility and some maturity and reconsider whether we are living up to the bar that we have set ourselves. This debate has been framed up as being about the government's water reform program, but it isn't. It's fundamentally about which of our relationships we prioritise when we're working on significant issues, and we have chosen to join a group to be bound by the decisions of a group that have demonstrated no interest in involving iwi Māori in their work and have in fact misrepresented what little work has been done, which by default means
Point
that
of
our
order.
voice...
Point of order, that's factually incorrect.
Point of order, Councillor Houlihan. I will adjourn the meeting for that to be considered. I'll second it, Councillor Gary. Thank you. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed. Thank you.
Paul, if you could put the
Thank you. And so I'm not going to uphold the point of order. The group has claimed that they have a relationship with Mana Whenua, but in fact, Ngāi Tahu is clearly stated, and I turn to page 131, which talks about we see no evidence that the communities for local democracy have attempted to engage with Ngāi Tahu. So that was factually correct. And it's a matter of opinion. So I'm not going to, in terms of Councillor Houlihan's point of order, I'm not going to uphold the point of order. I'll hand back to the Mayor.
You're on mute.
My apologies. Which by default means that on this issue, our voice is being decided without Mana Whenua input, the absolute opposite of what we have committed to within our own work program, the absolute opposite of what we're trying to achieve through the appointment of Rūnaka representatives to council standing committees. What message does this send to the representatives that we have on the Infrastructure Services Committee? Yes, we want you to come and provide a missing perspective in our discussions around water infrastructure, while at the same time knowing that we are part of a group who don't care. I expect there'll be plenty of arguments made today to justify the
Point
decision.
of order. Saying a group does not care, meaning we don't care, is incorrect. 25.2 disrespectful to councillors.
Councillor, I wasn't referring to council.
I still call the point of order because the group do care. They wouldn't have set up if they didn't. And we're referring to Christchurch Council, Queenstown Council, Timaru, and
I'll move that we adjourn the meeting.
Zealand.
Seconded Councillor Gary. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed.
Thank you. I'm not going to uphold that point of order. It was a general comment, and it's going to be a very long meeting if councillors continue to do this. Clearly, if it was assigned to a particular person, that's another matter entirely. But I'm sure that I have a feeling the Mayor's going to go on to make some comments that were cut off entirely. So I'm going to hand back to His Worship now to finish.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. I expect there will be plenty of arguments made today to justify the decision that we have made last month. and to defend our sticking with that decision today. That we are disappointed in the process that the government has followed and in elements of the wider reform program, which we have already said on numerous occasions, and there are plenty of ways to make our point to government that don't require us turning our back on mana whenua, that we are being held to ransom by the Rūnaka, and we aren't being held to ransom at all. We're being held accountable for the disconnect between our words and our actions. And it is hard to manage a work program that is underpinned by the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi without partners to support us in doing that work. That it is our own fault or my fault for not getting angrier about the government's water reform proposals earlier, and that we now have no choice but to line up alongside this group. That if we had more cultural capability training, we might be in a different place, as if learning a few kupu and karakia might cut it. It's never been obvious to me more than in the last few weeks that we need to understand collectively more of our own history, which is topical now that we finally have a school's history curriculum, and you only have to see and listen to the loudest voices in opposition to that, how that is going to play out. But also, some of this work is on us to do ourselves as individuals. The one excuse I would hope we could resist in this forum today is any suggestion that we know better than the Rūnaka do, or better than Ngāi Tahu do about what's in their best interests. Or as we read this morning, that we can tell them how they should feel in response to decisions that council has made. People may go to great lengths to let us know that they are not racists, because that seems to be the takeaway from comments I have made around the uglier elements of the public discourse and in some of the campaigns against the government's proposals. I certainly have never accused any individual sitting around this table of being racist. I did say that the collective that we are now a part of sit a little too comfortably with some of those darker elements than I am okay with, and I stand by that today. I have to accept that not all elected members will see repairing this relationship as an urgent priority, but the debates and the votes that we have had on similar issues tells me that most of us do. This is something that we collectively take seriously, and we have been challenged in the first instance to make a tangible commitment to partnership in order to start that process. And so the question I have for the meeting is, for those of you who want to fix it, but who can't support this motion as that tangible commitment, then what is the alternative? Because if you can't support this motion or put forward an alternative, then I think the commitments that we have collectively made start to ring a little hollow. I had the privilege of speaking on the Paipai Arotako at Waitangi Day in 2020. And that morning, I made a commitment to approach our relationship with the Rūnaka with a bit more taringa and a bit less waha. So more listening and less talking. And I'm not asking you today to listen to me in supporting this motion. I'm asking you to listen to mana whenua who have asked us to support this motion. And I will take further speakers. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Do I need my glasses? I may not need them. So today we are meeting because the government of the day believes more than or almost $3 billion worth of infrastructure assets owned by Dunedin ratepayers should be forfeited. The government is trying to railroad councils throughout the country to dissolve ownership of crucial water assets, despite heavy opposition by the majority of the nation's councils, largely over ownership and governance concerns. We are also meeting today because government is trying to push through these reforms at any cost. Government want to amalgamate council-owned drinking, waste and stormwater infrastructure and services into 4 publicly owned water entities. but today we're talking about the Three Waters. This would take direct control away from councils. We are being forced to make decisions. This cannot be forced or rushed. We are also sitting here today because the government went into an agreement with Ngāi Tahu to manage the South Island assets or work together with us on a co-governance. The problem being government did not include our council in these discussions. How can elected members of this city make sound judgments on such crucial investments on behalf of our ratepayers when we are quite simply in the dark about how to proceed? We simply cannot. Today is about equity for our people, every single citizen living in Dunedin. I refute any accusation or gutter politics attempts to suggest otherwise. It is absolutely absurd to dish out the race card when this has nothing to do with race. We shouldn't be knocking down others. We need to rise together, work together, and build each other up. But to do this, we need open communication. We need open discussions and we need transparency. And we have not had this from government. I lay the blame fairly and squarely on the government of the day. Until councils have transparency, we cannot build trust, and almost $3 billion worth of assets will not be handed over on my watch without more transparency. I am disappointed council and mana whenua have been put in this position, and somehow, instead of the spotlight being on government's bullying tactics to forfeit assets, it is turned to our existing relationships with mana whenua. I urge our mayor today to take some leadership and assure us he will organise hui with mana whenua, where we can sit together and better understand and repair. The government wants to transfer these assets to the new entity, giving councils little or no say in what happens to them. Government has offered council a token 46 million for these assets. Dunedin is not the only city or council upset by this. 32 councils throughout New Zealand have joined Councils for Local Democracy, and Auckland have voiced concerns. This is not a splinter group, as people try to tell you. If Auckland joined, this group would represent more than 3 million people in New Zealand. When I voted to join C4LD, I did so because I took an oath to represent the best interests of all Dunedin ratepayers, and I do not believe the current deal does.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I want to start by thanking you for bringing this notice of motion. And of course, one that I was very happy to sign, had no issues doing that. I also want to state that the reasons I voted against the original motion still stand. And actually, in fact, during the intervening period and in light of presentations and communications from our two Runaka, my reasons have been reinforced and strengthened. Speaking in support of this motion, I want to highlight 4 points. Firstly, I'll endeavour to stick to the content of the motion in front of us. I don't think it's necessary or in any way helpful, as Councillor Houlihan has just done, to relitigate all the reasons why we don't agree with any or a part of the Three Waters reform. That said, one thing we all do agree on is that change is needed to deliver safe, environmentally sustainable and affordable water services to all New Zealanders. And as a fairly recent communication from LJNZ sent to all of us quite rightly stated, that fact seems to have been lost in the public conversation, which is a real shame. So back to the motion. The fallout emanating from the original decision should have left no ambiguity in any of our minds about the ramifications for this that this has in terms of our commitment to the Treaty of Waitangi and our partnership with mana whenua. I, like some of you, was left with a sick feeling in my stomach after the last vote, and I publicly stated it was the most embarrassing moment for me as a Dunedin City Councillor. And that was for a number of reasons. As attachment F highlights, the decision has a potentially catastrophic effect on a whole raft of current and future projects that Council was working through in partnership with Mana Whenua. Secondly, whether some of you like it or not, we have obligations as a local authority to take our Crown delegated responsibilities seriously, just not to pick and choose what suits us when it's convenient. So I invite any one of the 8 of you who voted to join C4LD to answer this question. How does voting to join a group that has shut Mana Whenua out reflect partnership? And moreover, how does it reflect some aspirations many of you have declared since the vote to be more culturally aware? Please give me an answer to that very important question. I'm meant to be the outsider here. I'm the import to council from the UK, but I get it. I get that Maori have had 180 years of being minimised, ignored, and shut out. I get that we have obligations under Article 2 of Te Tiriti. I get that the Ngāi Tahu Claim Settlement of Act 1998 promised that the Crown would act in a new spirit of cooperation with iwi. Why don't you get it? Particularly the 2 of you who whakapapa to Ngāi Tahu and like to remind us so when it suits you. That there's no doubt I need to undertake appropriate treaty training, but I'm quite obviously not alone in that. My second to last point is the claim in meetings after the first vote that people weren't aware of the repercussions for Mana Whenua by us joining C4LD. That's absolute nonsense. Gabrielle Huria's clear, honest and unequivocal presentation to us in the public forum prior to the meeting should have left no doubt in anyone's mind where Mana Whenua stood on this issue. To say otherwise would be disingenuous in the extreme. Now, finally, and this one might rankle 1 or 2 of you, whether you like it or not, the government is already listening to LGNZ via the Three Waters Governance Working Group, who, by the way, have engaged with iwi Māori. Front and centre of their recommendations put forward and being considered by the government are around giving more tangible expression to the ownership of assets and, of course, stronger protections against any future privatisation. So, any of you that think a majority government is going to listen to a splinter group with a political axe to grind that has failed to engage with iwi Māori is quite frankly, I think, living in cloud cuckoo land. And in closing, and I'll be very clear here, if you vote to oppose this motion today, and you can remind me of this in the future if I'm wrong, if you vote to oppose this motion and for this council to still be part of this splinter group, be very aware that joining this group will achieve absolutely nothing other than the destruction of our relationship with Mana Whenua and all the work started by Dave Cole and continued thereafter. Is that a price worth paying for absolutely nothing? Those councillors who voted to splinter away need to change their vote today. We want and need Mana Whenua to be part of decisions made for our city. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor. As far as I'm aware, we only have 1 elected member who whakapapas to the Ngāi Tahu Takiwā, but they can speak for themselves. And I'd remind councillors, even though you may be on mute, some of us are better lip readers than others. Councillor Raddick.
Yes. Kia ora tātou, ko Jules Raddick. Minister Mahuta once said about Three Waters, "It's my strong view that engagement with local government sector is a critical part of trying to find a solution to a really difficult challenge." She was correct. Unfortunately, she forgot about engagement, instead gave us a lecture about what she wanted to do, then proceeded to mandate when most councils refused to sign up. Councils looked to their organisation, Local Government New Zealand, LGNZ, to voice their ideas and alternatives, but that was impossible because LGNZ had signed an agreement saying they would not oppose Three Waters, thus rendering themselves toothless. For councils wishing to propose confiscation of their assets, there is no option but to join C4LD.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes.
Just as a point of correction, as has been made clear earlier on in the meeting, the heads of agreement that LGNZ signed said that they would specifically not oppose mandation, which isn't the same as saying that they wouldn't oppose elements of the Three Waters program. And so I just wanted to clarify that.
I read from their heads of agreement, section 4.2, LGNZ commits to supporting, endorsing and promoting the Three Waters reform program. So, you know, please stand corrected.
Carry on, Councillor.
So, no option but to join C4LD so that our grave concerns can be adequately represented to the government. And despite an earlier president of LGNZ stating that local government strongly opposes mandatory aggregation of water assets, the current LGNZ executive, which includes Mayor Hawkins, betrayed the interests of ratepayers throughout New Zealand, which is exactly why Communities for Local Democracy, C4LD, was formed by councils from one end of the country to the other. Who was that earlier president? Mayor Dave Cull. And it's beholden on every one of us to honour Dave's memory and resist the government's one-size-fits-all policy making. The only effective group representation choice available to us is to join our friends and neighbours in C4LD. So I urge some of you around this table to ignore your party political masters and stand up for Dunedin. Listen to your residents and vote to stay with C4LD. Major reform like this needs to be done in partnership with iwi and local communities. So said Eugenie Sage. It appears that iwi have enjoyed a process and are happy with the outcome, but local communities most certainly have not had a partnership process. Neither are they happy. That is why C4LD has been formed by our local body, friends and neighbours, Christchurch, Ashburton, Timaru, Queenstown and others, to represent our concerns. If you ask your friends and neighbours whether they want to give away $3 billion of DCC assets, I suspect most of them will say, hell no. So I exhort you to represent their wishes and vote to remain with Communities for Local Democracy. Remember your oath of office. You declared to work in the best interests of the city of Dunedin, not for some party political platform. C4LD want a proper consultation program and co-design of the governance arrangement that is clearly stated despite misrepresentation here. The Ngāi Tahu position that we all received in writing last week is to remain committed to working with all councils in the Takiwa to get a result that actually works for councils, iwi and the community. What C4LD want is exactly the same, a result that works, that actually works for councils, iwi and the community. Vote to stay with them so that our Dunedin voice can be actually heard. I'm reminded of something that happened at my home. I'd mentioned getting a new couch, and my dearly beloved told me that she'd talked to Big Boss Furniture and they said they had the perfect one for us. In fact, it was the perfect couch for everyone. In fact, it was the only one they had and perfect for everyone's needs. I said that all our friends and neighbours have been going to Choice Home Decor, where they got to figure out what was best for their house and their family, and it turned out they got great value for money. So I said, how about we go take a look together, maybe even take the kids, you know, do the family thing. And she said, what do you think?
Councillor Vandervis.
We have here a question at its essence, in my view, of whether we value local democracy or whether we accept centralised control. We have a number of councillors currently who have been very strong in their voting for centralised control of a number of things, from the water quality standards right through to resisting communities for local democracy. The claim by both the Mayor and Councillor Walker that Communities for Local Democracy is a splinter group seems to me to have a completely backwards understanding of what a splinter is. A splinter is a very small sliver of wood that shoots off from the main body. If we look at the number of councils that wanted to opt out of Three Waters, 60 of 67 of them wanted to opt out. That is the main body. If we look at the number of South Island councils that want and have joined already Communities for Local Democracy, they are not a splinter, they are the vast majority. It's our mayor and people like Councillor Walker that are the splinters in not representing what the people of Dunedin want, in not representing the number of councils that have decided not to buy the forced Mahuta decision to go against what she initially told us would be an opt-in or opt-out process, hoping, I suppose, that we would opt in when we had millions dangled in front of us short term. What MP Mahuta has done is a complete about turn, having first told us that we would have some democratic opt-in or opt-out rights. Those have now been taken away, and we're simply going to be mandated. The splinter here is Mayor Hawkins wanting to break away from a majority council decision, using the absence of Councillor Hall, in this case, I believe, to perhaps overturn a very narrow vote, and then making a lot of claims which, quite frankly, are simply not true. The claim that Communities for Local Democracy is a splinter group is not true in any understanding of the word splinter that I know. They represent the majority of councils in the South Island particularly. The claim that we all agree that change is needed is also not true, because I don't agree that these changes are needed. I think that most people in Dunedin are actually quite happy with Three Waters as they are. I don't believe also that the councils that still own their Three Waters assets are going to be happy with that ownership supposedly being maintained while control of the ownership is taken away by central government group and iwi. The use of the word ownership by Ngāi Tahu's representative and by others, claiming that we would still somehow own the ownership of these Three Waters when we no longer have control over it, is absurd, because ownership means control. If you own a driveway but someone else can control its use, you no longer actually have real ownership. I wonder why it is that we are now trying to have our vote overturned when the vast majority of people that we represent are very keen to keep our major Three Waters infrastructure. Do we want local democracy, or are we going to accept centralized control? I believe we should have local control over our Three Waters, and I believe that this revocation motion flies absolutely in the face of local democracy.
There appear to be no further speakers. So in reply, Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Your Worship. How do we get here today? This debate, in my opinion, marks the culmination of 2 years of personal effort for me to bring attention to the council and the people of Dunedin the loss of control of almost $3 billion worth of infrastructure assets. This change has been heralded by the government as a necessity, but conclusion statements around affordability without supporting evidence have been the hallmark of the debate. An advertising campaign that even the minister herself admitted was close to disinformation. I've obviously not been the only person working on this. Many councils have also been involved, especially in the last 6 months. However, I've never been able to get engagement from the Mayor to proactively move on the delivery component of these reforms. And this is my singular focus, the delivery entity, the establishment of a corporate delivery model and the loss of local control. I seek an outcome that both protects the people of the city as well as achieving the government's objectives in health and environmental outcomes and establishing iwi co-governance. An important department of all of this is Ngāi Tahu. I completely support the governance role for iwi that are being forwarded by the government, but it has always puzzled me the extent to which multiple requests to actively engage with Ngāi Tahu have never been met with any actions in this council. As we approach this debate, the ramifications are reverberating all over the Ngāi Tahu takiwā, and I think that today will reverberate throughout the country. The large water entity model weakens the voice of most councils and also small iwi. Commentary is already being made today about how C4LD does not interact with iwi and how iwi do not want to interact with C4LD. Well, as far as I can tell, only one iwi has made that statement. We have heard almost nothing out of the North Island. And I am very interested to see how when A, B, and C start getting rolled out, what people have to say about how good these roles really are. As part of my talking to others outside the city, I've also been made aware of the pressure has been put on Waimakariri, Christchurch, and Queenstown too. The general consensus is that this is because C4LD is, as opposed to what Councillor Walker is saying, starting to have an impact on bringing the government back to the negotiating table over entity design. Entity design, not iwi co-governance, not water reform in general, just entity design. And to knock Christchurch and Dunedin out would be a great win for the government. We are being told here today this notice of motion is being put forward because we have broken a treaty partnership, but no supporting statement regarding what treaty breach has occurred has been stated except that we've joined C4LD. This is similar to the statement released earlier in the week that a number of council projects were under threat, a statement initiated by the Mayor and later corrected as not being completely correct. In joining C4LD itself constitutes a treaty breach by councils, then every one of the 32 councils that have joined to date must also be in breach. If that were the case, then you would have expected a national outcry. I have another thought. On October 2020, 18 months ago, Ngāi Tahu went ahead with negotiations with the government on the formation of the water entities, as is their right. But what matters is that the government, and it's the government I'm bringing attention to here, were designing Entity D even during the period we were assured by it that councils could propose alternative models and could opt in or opt out whatever was proposed. Knowing now that for a whole year before the government mandated the entities, it has been designing Entity D, it draws into doubt how genuine the government's consultation process was and how it will be going forward. Putting it another way, if the government had been in active negotiations since October 2020 on the formations of one of the 4 large water entities, it raises the question, how sincere or truthful were the government when they asked councils to go into agreements that were designed to be open-ended? And in which councils had the right to go in or out, depending on the period of what came next, when throughout this period, they were putting in place Entity D. And I asked the question of ourselves, why were we so compliant? Even today, in the actions from resolution section of the meeting, it is clear that the DCC will not make a stand on this neoliberal business model. Others too have also been acutely aware that Mana Whenua must have had a position on Three Waters, but we did not know what it was or nor have the opportunity to talk face to face on the commonalities and differences. At a council meeting in February 23rd last year, a little over 12 months ago, when discussing a submission by the Otago South and Three Waters office, Councillor Elder asked the question, what work has been done with iwi? Chief Executive's answer was, Mana Whenua have a particular interest in this legislation and have been doing a lot of work among themselves and have a position that may or may not align with what councils want. but they are progressing that themselves in parallel with this process, but also independently. The answer from the Chief Executive already showed that there was a separation of powers occurring way back then. The fact that there's been no follow-up along the lines of direct communication with the councillors and mana whenua is what we are facing all along. I would agree that the Māori Participation Working Party has not been working well. I don't believe there's actually been active transmission in either direction. Now look, as the council came to resolution on 23rd of November last year, where the DCC opposed the formation of the 4 entities, we were in direct opposition of the Ngāi Tahu position. But we as the councillors at that time didn't know. By that November 23rd meeting, nobody had told us the Ngāi Tahu position. That came out in December. Every time someone asked to talk directly and could have found out the position, the mayor blocked the request. Our trains were on the same track, running towards each other at full throttle, and nobody was talking. They collided 2 weeks ago. This resolution has come too early.
Councillor, that's your time.
Oh, what? Good.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. It takes a sense of humility to recognise that you might be wrong and courage to put it right. Today, some of you may choose to do just that, put right or wrong, and if you do, you will garner respect for having the courage to do so. But make no mistake that it is likely the most important vote you will cast in your time as an elected member. This is a pivotal moment in Ōtauti's history, a crossroads and one that will be remembered. What may seem apt if I was in a generous frame of mind is the well-known Bible verse, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do, but I am not. I am deeply distressed by the situation we are in. What got us here, in my opinion, was at worst high-handedness, at best naivety. It is a situation of our own making, which only we can change. We've heard it all now. You didn't know the implications. You were surprised. It was someone else's fault. And the latest, we've been blackmailed, held to ransom. How can it be a problem for Māori? But how could you not have known what you were doing when you voted for us to join C4LD? To rewind and to better understand, Waitangi Day 2020, if you were in attendance, water was signalled as the issue for mana whenua in coming years. The meeting with Minister Mahuta, Kai Tahu clearly stated their views on water reform. Gabriel Huria presented Kai Tahu's views again on the 22nd of February at our council meeting, and it was requested that we not join C4LD for good reason clearly articulated. And that presentation from Ms. Huria was directly before we voted on whether or not to join the group. If after all of that, you did not understand the implications of voting to join that group, then we should certainly know now that it caused deep hurt and made a mockery of our commitment to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, that we turned our back on mana whenua, that it significantly damaged our partnership with mana whenua, that it has unleashed some vile racism in the community, and it prompted a young person to say to me yesterday, sometimes I don't recognise the city I thought I lived in. I have often thought about the former mayor, the late Dave Cole, through this time, and I'm greatly saddened that a relationship he worked so hard to strengthen has been wrought asunder. One of his proudest achievements was developing a genuine and authentic partnership with mana whenua, which has been actively continued by Mayor Hawkins through this triennium. At this point, I want to acknowledge CEO Graham and the staff who've worked hard across the organisation to give effect to the treaty and embed it in everything we do. That work was at a crucial juncture. Our recent decision as council has been a massive disruption to that important mahi and an unnecessary distraction. Let's be clear, this is not about Three Waters reform. Our ability to voice our opposition to aspects of Three Waters reform was never going to be dependent on joining C4LD. There are other avenues. It has never been a choice between advocating for our community regarding water reform and our partnership with mana whenua. It is possible to do both, but not via C4LD. Mana whenua alongside Tuiwi have a better chance of a bigger voice and strong advocacy on Three Waters reform. We have responsibilities to our partner under the Treaty of Waitangi enshrined in legislation, but it's critically about equity and justice, a moral obligation with people at the heart of it. If you're finally understanding the implications of our decision, then it is time to change our decision by changing your vote. We have all had to face the gravity of the situation. We need to put this right and choose our relationship with mana whenua whenua as the priority over a group of councils from other parts of the country. This is about an authentic and real partnership with our local runaka, a partnership with the people we live and work alongside, our friends and neighbours. This is personal. Have the humility to know what you need to do and have the courage to do it. And finally, and most importantly, I want to acknowledge mana whenua's honesty, their grace and dignity throughout this whole sad affair. Always dignified and generous of spirit, you have been steadfast, clear and immensely patient in the face of great pain. May we look to a brighter future for all of us, mana whenua and tauiwi alongside one another in strong partnership, advocating for all of our people. And there's a beautiful kaitahu whakatauki that goes to the heart of today, which I respectfully quote. Mō tātou a mō ka uri a mori ake nei, for us and our children after us.
Thank you, Councillor Elder.
Kia ora. Thank you. This has been very fraught for me, as it's been fraught for all of us, I think, for Ngāi Tahu, for all the councillors, for council. And as I sit here, I have empathy for both sides of the debate today, and I'm torn and heartbroken at what has transpired because of the government's poor process of Three Waters. As I understand it, Ngāi Tahu as tangata whenua have a stewardship and care role in the health of our water. Te mana o te wai needs to be upheld for a healthy community, healthy kai, healthy land, healthy rivers and healthy sea. They have sought to have a significant role for over 180 years. What the government has offered them in Three Waters reform is that role. From their viewpoint, they feel very hurt should their role as treaty partner be diminished in any way. Understandably so. And I am very sorry our decision to join Communities for Local Democracy hurt you so deeply. On the other side of the debate is councils all over New Zealand's unease at the lack of democratic process in the Three Waters reform. At no time during the reform process was there any choice in models or in governance. In effect, councils have had no voice in a predetermined outcome that has been mandated. It goes against everything we believe in. It is not democracy. The outcome of this unease is an advocacy group called Councils for Local Democracy, who are advocating for a reset and a conversation around other models, which include co-governance and partnership with Māori, which is why I and my fellow councillors at the time voted to join this group, so that councils and iwi could have more choices and a real voice in the co-creation of Three Waters reform. I believe the government has, both groups have valid world views, and both those views need to be heard. I believe the government needs to listen to the valid concerns of both world views, because they are both valid. So why are we in a lose-lose situation? Well, as far as I can see it, at the moment I'm feeling really torn. The responsibility lies fair and square with the Crown's process, which was predetermined from the outset. The public's introduction to Three Waters reform was a series of ads denigrating local government's management of Three Waters. The Crown approached councils for the input for Three Waters debate. Councils found they had no choice when it came to other models for ownership and governance, and effectively they had no voice in the process. The government had a predetermined outcome. The Crown also appears to have had separate process with iwi as co-governors and partners. This meant there have been very few opportunities for open dialogue with councils and iwi, which would have been wonderful, around shared values and none around other options or choices, an open dialogue between iwi and councils. The government gave very little weight to community consultation by councils on what their communities is their community's major asset. Community consultation and feedback have largely been ignored.
1 minute.
The Crown, yeah, sorry?
You have 1 minute, just warning you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Right, the Crown then said councils could opt in or out of Three Waters reform. Subsequently, the government have mandated 4 entities model and Three Waters reform. What is the alternative? And that's a question which is really valid that Aaron asks. I believe both iwi and councils share many, many common values, and we have not had that opportunity to kānohi, ki te kānohi, throughout the process. So what do I think is the way forward? And I think it's a really valid way forward, and I'm wanting it to happen, and that is the way forward is to kānohi ki te kaunēhi, to set aside time to talk and listen, to hear each other's pain, to grow our understanding of each other and where we are coming from, and together work out in the spirit of co-governance and partnership, how we can have a model that respects both the treaty partnership and the democratic process. So I think that process is a really good alternative, and one that we didn't have the opportunity to do throughout the process. And I believe that would have helped avoid what has happened today. Well, happened in the last wee while, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stones.
Thank you, Your Worship. Today's debate, as Your Worship has already stated, is not about our community's position on the Three Waters reform and the shift in position of our government to mandate rather than allow councils to consult with their communities. We've already stated our disappointment as a council in the government's approach. We've unanimously expressed our concerns and continue to do so. This debate is about how we have chosen to oppose it through joining C4LD, a group that has failed to properly engage with Māori and in particular Ngāi Tahu. A decision that has not only blindsided local mana whenua, but flies in the face of the partnership we have with them. It is therefore no surprise that this has shaken our partnership with them to the very roots. Councillors, we need to seriously consider whether we want to begin to repair the damage to our relationship with mana whenua and the commitment we have made to honour Te Tiriti. And to do this will require us to step back from our decision to join C4LD and to re-engage with mana whenua. Doing this does not mean that we are agreeing to not oppose aspects of the Three Waters reform legislation. I believe as a council, we have a responsibility to continue to communicate our concerns from the community with government. Hopefully, we can do that with the support of mana whenua. Please, councillors, do not throw our relationship with mana whenua and commitment to Te Tiriti away. In my time on council, a lot of effort has been put into building this relationship. And it seems to me to be crazy to throw that out when we can actually achieve what we want to do in expressing our community's voice directly from ourselves. Vote to reverse what has, perhaps unwittingly, been a bad decision. Let's re-engage with mana whenua and seek to stand together to ensure our community's voices are heard by government. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, I'd like to have my 5 cents worth. I think some of the speakers I've heard around the table today, I think they've missed the point. This is not about a decision to agree with Three Waters, the proposal. I don't think I've heard anyone around our council table say that that is their agreed position. My original reasons for not joining this were well, I thought they were well put it out in the first one. I didn't feel that it was right for us to basically get rid of our right to have an equal vote. We were going to pay twice as much to join because of our size, and yet we were only going to have the same vote as some little council with 6 or 8 or 10 or 14,000 people. And I think that was really wrong. But since then, we've had clear discussion, and I've seen some of the posts that people have put up on our social media. We say we wouldn't have got to this situation if we'd had better cultural training. Well, I don't know what cultural training you need, but I know this, that as far as cultural things go, look, I had never been into a mosque until a few years ago. I was in Saudi Arabia, and I walked in, not Saudi Arabia, sorry, Dubai. I walked into a mosque, and I didn't realise until someone tapped me on the shoulder, look, sir, you have to take your shoes off. You know, and that is exactly the same I found when I've walked onto Marae here in New Zealand. And no one is going to complain if you make a wee faux pas because you didn't realise something. This is not about making a wee faux pas. This is not about a lack of cultural training. All the cultural training in the world, you could still make the same mistake that we've made here. You know, we've been told, Councillor O'Malley sort of said that, well, he didn't think the Maori Working Participation Party had been working that well. Well, sorry, Jim, I've gone to those meetings for the last 6 years, just like you have, and I've found and I've thought that we were getting into a much better space, and I thought that we were starting to be really productive in some of the things and the outcomes that we'd had. And I don't have any problem with that. Some other councillors have said online, we don't know what happens in the Maori Working Participation meetings, and I don't even know if we can get minutes for these meetings. Well, those meetings are there, they're available. You are all welcome, as has been said multiple times. Everyone is welcome to come to those meetings. I can see Councillor Houlihan shaking her head, but the reality of it is she's welcome at every one of those meetings. And that is the correct truth. Keep shaking your head, it doesn't make any difference. But look, I'm going to support this motion today. It was a poor decision, and someone has said to me today, they've said, well, you obviously think Three Waters is okay. That's not what I'm saying, and I want that made very clear. I do not support the Three Waters in the current proposal. All I want to do is pick my battles, and I don't think it's always true to say the enemy of my enemy is my friend. In this case, the enemy of my enemy is not my friend, and I don't want to join up with this group. Whether you call it a splinter group or whatever, it doesn't worry me how you tag it. I don't want to be aligned with those people, and I'm going to stick with my original vote.
Thank you, Councillor Lofisol. Councillor, you're on mute.
Sorry, aroha mai. Tēnā koe, Your Worship. Firstly, I want to pay tribute to the mana whenua o tēnei rohe, that hapu and their leaders, for their very survival despite all the incursions that colonisation has brought to them, as evidenced by Te Kreme, the claim, which from 1849 to 1998 was the world's longest ever claim taken by an Indigenous nation against the settler government. So I want to remember Ricky Allison, Wee Duff, Alva Kappa, Emma Gruby, Magda Walscott, Kuau Langsbury, Don Tamati, Ranui Parata, Emma Gruby, and Tahu Pōtiki, for their endless patience with us as tauiwi, those of us who are not Māori, and for their manaakitaka for whānau such as mine. I want to pay tribute especially to Mr. Pōtiki, who in 2018 during the LTP process, when I asked him as to advice he had for us as governors to be fit partners, he demurred from giving specific advice, as has Te Upoko or Otakou, Mr. Edward Ellison, has done with respect to this. I think they're giving us the space to work out what it means to be a morally fit and conscious treaty partner, because that's what this is about, morality and knowing where you stand on Māori land. I've said it before around this council table, we are wealthy as a nation because of Māori land and off the backs of tangata whenua everywhere. And I understand the frustration with the 6 Labour government's crappy process, especially with the entities model. And I salute Councillor O'Malley for his dogged hard work, but it's about a relationship. And for me, such a process as the entities model is nothing new, nor is it surprising, because all, whether they're Labour or national governments, have instituted such legislation. Whenever Māori were going to benefit, they changed the law. Helen Clark's Foreshore and Seabed Act of 2004 is the latest example. Māori went to the appeals court because they wanted to establish a mussel fisheries, and they were constantly denied. So they went to the land court, and the land court said, yes, there is a case to answer. Bang, Helen Clark makes it about the beaches, access to the beaches. So to me, an activist of over 40 years, and where I've protested against both National and Labour, we need to think about relationships. That's what the treaty is about, relationships. And yes, mana whenua have been working for decades on te mana o te wai. Dr. Maire Te Tau said at that meeting at the municipal chambers, this is going to happen whether you like it or not. That's a very clear position. So we need to think about our relationships and whether we really, really want to honour them. That's where it starts. And as Dr. Rookstall has said, and I have said, mana whenua are ratepayers too. Democracy has never served Indigenous peoples overrun by settler societies by virtue of majority rules. So let's examine that sacred cow democracy. And let's think, please, about the signal we're sending to young Māori and tauiwi, all those who are not Māori, who are committed to a just society. A just society where the goodies and wealth of Māori land and off the backs of tangata whenua everywhere for the last 182 years is equitably distributed. Please think about that, because if we leave mana whenua out of the room, we're not going to get far forward.
Point of order, point of order.
Point of order, Councillor Houlihan.
The point of order is that we're not, by voting, if we vote to revoke joining this group, we're not leaving mana whenua out. All of us have said we want mana whenua involved, and the entity will have mana whenua in it, so mana whenua will not.
Councillor, it's not a point of order, it's a question of interpretation, and I'm not going to uphold it as a point of order. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mayor Hawkins, and kia ora, Councillor Lufiso, and thank you for what you've just said. This has obviously been a really challenging situation, and we've had many views from very many people, and I completely understand where a lot of people are coming from, and I really appreciate the debate that all of the councillors have brought to the table. And I go back to the resolution that this motion seeks to overturn about joining councils for local democracy. And I guess we need to go back to why the majority of councillors voted to join Communities for Local Democracy. And this was about a group, currently 32 of the 67 councils, asking government to engage openly and transparently and honestly look at other models for water reform delivery. And there's been suggestions of council controlled organisations, smaller, more local areas like a more logical Otago Southern model, less bureaucracy. It's not a splinter group nor a protest group or whatever demeaning name of the week is chosen for this week. It's almost half of city councils, plus Auckland sitting outside the group who've been very vocal too. We've all agreed, as has been brought up and said many times in our speeches over the last 9 months, that we support water reform to ensure that our water is safe to drink and that we stop environmental damage through delivering water differently, plus to have iwi involvement in governance. The big question that we're discussing is how is this going to be delivered? And what model is the best model for Dunedin? That's simply all we want. We're here to speak up for Dunedin to government. Together as a group of councils, we have a stronger national voice, and that's how I've been feeling about joining Communities for Local Democracy. What we've seen, and many people have brought it up, is government coming up with a one-size-fits-all model for water delivery governance, break promises about engagement and consultation and come back with a mandate. Then when there's an uproar from councils, handpick a panel to engage with on their terms for feedback, which they may or may not consider. Communities are asking, where's our say? They feel like they're going to lose their assets to centralisation and have no say in how those assets are used for the future. The water reform started off as a farce with the insulting ads that people have mentioned and seems to be ending up as a nightmare. We've seen what happened with neoliberal reforms in the 1980s, and we need to ensure that a new water system is so robust that it can't break down the line and have unintended consequences. My duty that I swore when I became a councillor, as others have mentioned, was to work in the best interests of the city of Dunedin, and that is what we're talking about today, and I hate that it's being presented as an either or. That is a very challenging and difficult way to present it, and I don't know where I sit on that. But what I feel we're talking about as council is about control of around $3 billion of Dunedin assets being removed from our council and us having limited say over where our water structures go in the future. I want to make sure that we're not hamstrung and we get the best deal for our populace. What I feel I'm seeing is the ugly world of national politics played out in local politics, that our council's objection to the water reform model, which we have strongly and openly signalled through the last year, passing majority motions, writing letters, asking for meetings, has been conflated to another level. Just on November the 11th, and I believe Councillor O'Malley talked about this, we passed another resolution affirming that we don't support the formation of the 4 water entities. We wanted a reset. We sought that government committed to meaningful communication with our community before advancing any further with water entity reform, and just don't feel that communication has been going on. We've been really clear over many months, yes, water reform, yes, iwi involvement, no to one size fits all, and please to engage communities and talk to us all. The group Councils for Local Democracy, Communities for Local Democracy was formed just at the end of last year when despondent councils look for a way to have a stronger voice. I support the treaty principles. I support working with mana whenua. 14 of the people around this council table voted for mana whenua representatives on our 2 key committees. That's part of our commitment to mana whenua, but we need to engage better, just like the government need to engage better. And I look forward to being part of rebuilding our local relationships. Back to C4LD, I remember why we voted to join, to push government to reset and meaningful engage on models for delivering water reform, like we've been asking for the last 9 months. We want safe water, we want accountable delivery mechanisms, we want partnership, and we want a strong say for Dunedin. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. I want to make a quick note of all the speakers so far, so that the passion and the commentary they have made, regardless of which way this vote goes, I don't think anybody will be left standing wondering what you were thinking. And the key that I'm getting is really at the heart of it, we are all passionate about Dunedin, and we're all passionate about the relationship with Runanga. So with that, I'll move on. I'm extremely disappointed that we are debating this motion. More importantly, I'm disappointed that the mover has made this about the City Council not respecting its relationship with the local runanga, rather than challenging the government over Three Waters for reform. We do need to frequently acknowledge Ngā Tahu and thank them for the work they have done with the council in the past, present and future. They are a valuable partner, colleague, friend, and a group of great knowledge and expertise. As we have heard from other speakers, it is sad that we have not spent enough time and energy engaging with the local iwi and having our views, sharing our views. It has been made very clear that Ngā Tahu are very focused on the governance of water and not the asset. How do we know this? They have clearly told us. And I quote from the letter attachment C, how anyone can think we as mana whenua wish to own sewer pipes, water reticulation systems, and stormwater drains is beyond us. That is not our desire or intent. A point repeated consistently across the Takawa by our people, and again during the address by Ms. Huria to Council. I believe 14 out of the 15 of us sitting around the council table support co-governance of Three Waters with Ngā Tahu. For me, this is a vote on the future of Dunedin's position on Three Waters. Status quo needs to change, but accepting government's approach and rolling over, hoping we make out okay, is not my desired option. I believe by the Dunedin City Council voting to leave communities for local democracy, we will be at the mercy of water reform as dictated by government. To me, it is important we need to have the voice of all Dunedin ratepayers heard. Let's remember the motion we agreed to vote at the 22nd of February Council meeting was joins the communities for local democracy with other councils around New Zealand, such as Christchurch City and Queenstown Lakes District Council, to collaborate to identify alternative solutions. To collaborate to identify alternative solutions. Important words there. To the proposed Three Waters restructure. The struggle I have is how do we show support for the iwi yet disagree with the government's approach to Three Waters? I feel the local government New Zealand panel members and government appointed panel members to the working group have failed to significantly move the goalposts of the government's approach to Three Waters. I found the 47 recommendations quite soft. And actually Minister Mahuta in one form actually said we'll take them on advisement. Not even really accepting them. If the DCC doesn't work with communities for local democracy, our voice won't be heard and concerns detailed. There is no other strong nationwide unified council voice in opposition to Three Waters, and the government has simply not been listening. Communities for local democracy is a coalition of 32 councils throughout New Zealand, representing over 1.6 million people. Yes, that is 47% of the councils in this country and 31% of the population. Please don't refer to as a splinter group, they are not. A voice in promoting for better than Three Waters reform, they definitely are. Let's remember, in September last year, that 60 of 67 councils did not support the Three Waters reform as presented by government. On September 20th, the council made a submission to the government on Three Waters reform. The key points from this letter were, council requests adequate time and appropriate accessible information to engage meaningfully with the community on Three Waters service delivery reform. Council requests the government to continue working constructively and in partnership with councils and iwi Māori to resolve issues prior to engagement with communities. Council must be able to control the strategic direction of land use planning. We voted 15 of us supported that. Let's continue that pathway. We were all in full agreement that Dunedin City Council needed to commit to consulting with the community on Three Waters reform in a meaningful way once the council has further information from the government on the next steps in the reform program. I see government not addressing any of these issues, but more importantly to me, there was absolutely no ability for the community to be consulted. We clearly stated Dunedin City Council needed to commit to consulting with the community on Three Waters reform in a meaningful way. I believe our city is going to be severely penalised through Three Waters. For example, thank you. For example, the value of our Three Water assets are approximately 2.8 billion, and the government through the DIA estimated Dunedin will receive $46 million. Think about that for a moment. If you have $1 million house, the government will reimburse you with approximately $16,000. In my opinion,
The time
government
limit
is,
is 5 minutes, Councillor.
okay, I'll just finish up. Thank you.
No,
I
you've-
believe we all support
you've
three waters
already
reforms.
exceeded your time, Councillor. Councillor Benson.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, colleagues. And thank you to our English import, who I think has said one of the most important things that has been articulated today. He does get it. And unfortunately, only half of us appear to. I'm sorry that your predictions, Your Worship, have come true. Indeed, that many of the comments that have been made have been completely irrelevant to what we should be talking about. And what we should be talking about is the hurt that we accidentally or knowingly caused in terms of our functional and operational relationships with iwi in our patch. No one could not have known, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But the key thing in all of this is that there's no one who's happy with Three Waters. There are lots of people who have major concerns about some or all of the aspects of what is proposed. Much of it we've not seen yet. No one is suggesting that the government's consultation process was other than superficial at best and a sham at worst. No one thinks the advertising campaign was anything other than insulting to local government. And the reality is there is a significant difference of opinion at various levels of government about where we go. Nothing constrains this authority and any other authority from expressing whatever opposition it wants to government directly. And the mistake we have unfortunately made is we've got into a tent with people that many of us would not like to share the time with. The single characteristic that's most disappointing for me anyway of this whole debate is how much effort people have put into finding excuses for the way they voted. They're looking for someone else to blame. And the true tragedy is that we were told from the get-go, or before actually, that there were issues with this group. We had the advice of the mayor, even before we had a discussion formally about the original notice of motion. We heard at that meeting from Gabriel Huria unequivocally that there were concerns. Edward Allison told us later, separately, what his view was. No one can have forgotten that. In the papers for today's meeting, we've got the two formal communications from the Runaka telling us that we got it wrong and making their view unequivocally clear. There have been some more direct, less formal communications in social media, initially directed to Councillor Elder, but many of us have seen them. And in the last few days, we've had an absolutely unequivocal written message delivered to all those who supported the original motion from the chairman of the Runaka, Rachel Wesley, that leaves absolutely no room for doubt. We got it wrong. It's embarrassing for all of us. We have an opportunity to begin to correct that hurt right now. So let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And that completes the set. In speaking in response, it's been brought up a couple of times, people's disappointment that we are revisiting this debate. And I thought the reasons were quite clear as to why. The response and the reaction from the Runaka, we've been told by some of our elected members, was a surprise. And so it seems, in light of that information, that it is entirely appropriate to give them the opportunity to reconsider. And I, in a crowded field, I think the most insulting thing I've heard at this meeting is the suggestion that we can best honour Mayor Cull's memory by maintaining a relationship with a group that has caused such a significant strain on our relationship with the local rūnaka. That is an outrageous thing to invoke the memory of a leader who took that work seriously and got us to the point where we have the relationship that we have today. It's been suggested that yes, there are commitments from this group to work with iwi Māori, and I agree they were smart enough to put that in their MOU, but we are measured by our actions and not our words, and we have that in writing attached to this paper, what those words actually mean. And indeed, when that group presented to the governance working group and told them that their suggested alternatives were the best outcome for Māori, they had to confess at that point that they hadn't actually asked anyone for input into coming to that conclusion. It's been said that 60 out of 67 councils opted out, or variations on that theme. Certainly 60 out of 67 councils had concerns about parts of the proposal and submitted in good faith on that. And I share the concerns about where that process got to, but to extrapolate that to suggest that that was a sign of all of those councils opting out, I think is wrong. And also, coincidentally, I can only assume mirrors the line taken by parliamentary opposition parties, which we can only assume is a coincidence given the concern that has been raised at this meeting about people following their political masters. I agree with Councillor Lord that the Māori Participation Working Party, aside from its terrible name that we will get around to correcting if we have the opportunity to, has been functioning at a far higher level and a far more productive level than has traditionally been the case, where it has focused down in the operational weeds, and I would hate to see that get thrown out. We've been asked what part of the Treaty of Waitangi has been breached here. Well, the three principles that we have committed to are participation, protection, and partnership, and it is the partnership that is strained by the decision that we have made. That is the issue with what we have done apropos of our commitment to the treaty principles. This is a problem entirely of our own making, and a problem we have the ability today to start to put right. It isn't the solution, but for all the people who have said here that they want to get together and organise hui and have a face-to-face conversation with mana whenua, before we do that, we have to make a tangible commitment to the partnership before that even happens. And I can't understate the significance of that. I think rightly, people haven't focused on the implications for Council's work programme, because I don't think that is the focus. Our support for this partnership with mana whenua should be based on principle, and it shouldn't be situational, where we defer to it and take it seriously when it suits us and not when it might be politically inconvenient. But it has resulted, as we know, in a fair degree of uncertainty for some significant projects that that are very near and dear to the hearts of us individually and collectively as council. So why would we put that at risk, and for what? To buy a $20,000 raffle ticket with fairly long odds on the government somehow changing its mind about where this is going? Or, and I think this is the real strategy here, sit and wait and hope for a change of government at the next general election that will have different priorities. It's hard to see how that is worth the uncertainty that is being that is now entered into our work program. Many of us here, most of us probably, if not all of us, are strong advocates for our colonial built heritage, but our history as a city didn't arrive on the Philip Lang. And I don't think we can celebrate our settler histories with any real pride if at the same time we are ignoring the people of the land that it is built on. Council voting down this resolution will be a significant blow to our work, and I believe to our city's reputation, and it will be entirely our fault. And no amount of Te Reo Māori night classes will absolve us of our responsibility for what we are doing here. The only honourable thing for us to do is to restate our commitment to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi by withdrawing from this group and set about the process of healing and of getting our work together back on track. And just in closing, I want to echo the comments that Councillor Lawfisel made in apologising as much as anything to mana whenua and mātāwaka Māori in Ōtepoti, because whenever we have these debates about the role of Māori in significant decision making, we know that it emboldens and empowers some of the uglier elements of our community. And we've all had the same emails over the weekend, people questioning all sorts of things that don't bear repeating in this forum, but we need to recognise the situation that we put our local Māori community in every time we revisit and relitigate decisions of this significance. And with that, I will take the vote by division.
Councillor Barker.
No.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Aye.
Councillor Elder. Councillor Elder.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm abstaining.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan.
No.
Councillor Lafiso.
Aye.
Councillor Lord.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
No.
Councillor Raddick.
No.
Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Councillor Wiley.
No.
Your Worship. Your Worship.
Unmute yourself.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Aye.
Carried 7-6 with 1 abstention.
Thank you. Ms. Graham, do you have procedural advice for us at this point?
Bear with me while I catch up. But yes, given the outcome of that resolution, Your Worship, the next paper should not be considered because it's not a valid motion that council can now consider.
Thank you. And that takes us to the end of the meeting. So thank you, councillors, for your time and energy today. And we'll see you again next week.